Human beings have always been capable of extraordinary cruelty. Long before modern prisons and courtrooms, punishment was public, physical, and designed to send a message. Across every continent, rulers, priests, and armies built devices and rituals whose only purpose was to turn pain into a spectacle. Today we're traveling from ancient Persia to imperial China, from the Mediterranean coast to the high seas, to look at some of the most horrifying methods of torture ever recorded, and the strange logic behind why they were used. Viewer discretion is advised. Section 1. Scaphism, Ancient Persia. Our journey starts around 400 BC in the Achaemenid Persian Empire. According to the historian Plutarch, a soldier named Mithridates made the fatal mistake of boasting at a royal banquet that he, not the king, had struck the killing blow against a rival prince. King Artaxerxes II was furious, and he sentenced Mithridates to a punishment now known as Scaphism, or the boats. The condemned man was stripped and bound inside a pair of hollowed-out boats or troughs, sealed together so only his head, hands, and feet stuck out. He was then force-fed milk and honey until diarrhea set in, and his exposed skin was coated in more honey to attract insects. Left to float on stagnant water under the sun, the victim would be slowly consumed by maggots and other insects burrowing into his own filth, while infection and dehydration did the rest. Ancient sources claim the ordeal could last well over a week. Whether every detail is historically accurate is debated by modern scholars, but Scaphism has survived for over 2,000 years as a symbol of methodical, drawn-out cruelty. Section 2. The Brazen Bull, Ancient Greece. Around the same era, on the island of Sicily, a bronze worker named Perillus of Athens pitched an invention to the tyrant Phalaris of Acragas, a life-sized hollow bull made entirely of bronze. A door in its side allowed a prisoner to be locked inside. A fire was then built underneath, slowly turning the metal into an oven. What made the Brazen Bull infamous wasn't just the method of execution, it was the design detail Perillus was proudest of. He built a system of tubes inside the bull's head so that the victim's screams would exit through the nostrils, transformed into something resembling the bellow of an angry animal. According to legend, Phalaris was so disturbed by the demonstration that he had Perillus thrown in first to test it, before eventually meeting the same fate himself when he lost power. The Brazen Bull became a recurring reference point in Greek and Roman writing for centuries, a shorthand for tyranny dressed up as spectacle. Section 3. Lingchi, Imperial China. Moving east and forward in time, we reach Imperial China, where a punishment known as Lingchi, commonly translated as death by 1,000 cuts, or slow slicing, was reserved for the most serious crimes on the books: treason, mass murder, and the killing of one's own parents. It appeared in Chinese legal history from around the 10th century, and wasn't formally abolished until 1905. Contrary to the popular myth, Lingchi wasn't thousands of tiny paper-cut-style wounds. Executioners methodically removed pieces of flesh and, eventually, limbs in a sequence intended to prolong the ordeal in front of a public crowd. Beyond the physical agony, the punishment carried deep cultural weight. In a belief system where the body was meant to remain whole after death, being deliberately dismembered was considered a spiritual punishment that extended beyond the execution itself. Photographs of Lingchi executions from the final years of the practice, taken by Western observers in the early 1900s, later became some of the most controversial images in the history of photography, reused and mythologized in ways that historians say distorted the historical record. Section 4. The Judas Cradle, Medieval and Early Modern Europe. Back in Europe, interrogators working for institutions like the Spanish Inquisition developed devices meant less for execution and more for extracting confessions. One of the most notorious was the so-called Judas Cradle, a stool topped with a pyramid-shaped point. The victim, often bound and suspended by ropes, would be slowly lowered onto the point, which made contact first with the most sensitive part of the body. Gravity, and sometimes added weights, did the rest over an extended period of time, and death frequently came from blood loss or infection rather than the initial injury. Devices like this weren't only about the pain in the moment, they were about the threat of what came next. Historians who study the Inquisition note that simply showing a prisoner the instruments in a torture chamber was often enough to produce a confession, true or false. The theater of cruelty was, in many cases, as important a tool as the cruelty itself. Section 5. Keelhauling, the open seas. Not every horrific punishment required an elaborate machine. Naval crews across several European empires used keelhauling, a punishment first codified in the ancient Rhodian Maritime Code and later adopted by Dutch, English, and other navies. A sailor accused of a serious offense would be tied to ropes and dragged underwater along the entire length of the ship's hull, from bow to stern, passing directly beneath the keel. The danger wasn't only drowning. Ship hulls of the era were frequently encrusted with barnacles and rough marine growth, which shredded skin and muscle as the body scraped along the underside of the vessel. Sailors who survived were left with permanent scarring. Many others didn't survive at all, dying from blood loss, shock, or asphyxiation mid-tow. The Dutch Navy is recorded as having formally abandoned the practice by the mid-1800s, by which point it had already become a cultural symbol of naval brutality, referenced in folklore and fiction for generations afterward. Section 6. The Rack. Medieval Europe. Few devices are as instantly recognizable as the rack, a wooden frame fitted with rollers at each end to which a prisoner's wrists and ankles were bound. As the rollers were slowly turned, the body was stretched in opposite directions, dislocating joints one by one and eventually tearing muscle and connective tissue. Unlike execution devices, the rack was built specifically as an interrogation tool. The goal was to keep the victim alive and conscious for as long as possible, escalating the pain gradually to break their resistance. Versions of stretching torture appear independently across multiple cultures and centuries, from ancient Rome to the dungeons of the Tower of London, which held its own rack well into the 1600s. The consistent reappearance of this basic idea, pulling the body apart slowly rather than quickly, says something uncomfortable about how deliberately these methods were engineered for maximum suffering with minimum lethality, at least in the short term. Section 7. Rat torture. One of the more psychologically disturbing methods recorded across multiple eras from ancient China to early modern Europe involved live rats. A cage or heavy pot containing rats was placed directly on a restrained victim's stomach or chest, then heated from above. With no other way to escape the rising heat, the rats would burrow downward, through the only route available to them, the victim's own body. What set this method apart from more purely physical torments was the added layer of psychological horror. The victim could see and hear the animals before the pain even began and had no way to influence what happened next. Historical accounts describe it being used as much for its reputation as for the physical outcome. Merely showing a prisoner the setup was sometimes enough to extract information. Section 8. Sleep deprivation. A modern and ancient weapon. Not every method on this list required blades, fire, or machinery at all. Sleep deprivation has been used as an interrogation technique across centuries, and disturbingly remains a documented method in more recent history. Medical research shows that beyond roughly 72 hours without sleep, the human brain and body begin to break down in serious ways. Hallucinations, paranoia, severe cognitive impairment, and, in extreme, sustained cases, fatal physiological collapse. What makes sleep deprivation stand out on a list otherwise dominated by iron, fire, and blades is how little evidence it leaves behind, and how effective it has proven at eroding a person's grip on reality without a single visible wound. It's a reminder that torture doesn't always look like the devices in a museum display case. Sometimes it's simply the deliberate removal of something the body cannot survive without. Closing segment. What ties all of these methods together isn't just the pain they caused, it's the purpose behind them. Some were designed to extract information. Some were meant to punish a specific crime with symbolic precision. Others existed purely as public spectacle, a warning broadcast to anyone watching. Almost all of them shared one grim design principle: prolonging suffering rather than ending it quickly. Studying this history isn't about dwelling on gore for its own sake. It's a window into how power, fear, and control have operated across very different societies, separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years, yet arriving at disturbingly similar conclusions about how to break the human body and mind. Most of these practices are, thankfully, long abolished, but the historical record survives as a stark reminder of what people are capable of when cruelty is given the backing of law.